Welcome to part 3 of the Minds of the Future. My name is Anna Sjöström-Douagy, and I am the host of this roundtable discussion between brilliant young minds in science and Professor Sir David MacMillan, Nobel Laureate in Chemistry 2021, and this is taking place at the Nobel Museum during the Nobel Week 2022 in Stockholm. The focus of solving the climate crisis has often been on the individual level. On the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's webpage, it is possible to calculate your own carbon footprint, and the New York Times has published guides on how to reduce your carbon emissions. Yet, in 2020, when the whole world was moved more or less into lockdown, the international passenger traffic dropped 60%, but the effect on carbon dioxide emissions only dropped 8% compared to 2019 levels. The U report, UNICEF's platform to bring in and engage young voices from all over the world, states that 88% of the youth feel responsible for the climate crisis, and 71% states that they want to have an active role in green transition. So going forward, is it reasonable to put as big focus on an individual efforts, or should more responsibility be put on companies and policymakers? What do you say, Ishan?
So I think it's really encouraging that so many young people feel responsible and want to take action. And I hope that that figure of 71% continues to go up as we get better at climate outreach and educating the public about the climate crisis. That being said, I think the onus of responsibility has to shift towards policymakers and companies, and specifically policies targeted at companies and providing sustainable infrastructure for the public. There's a couple reasons for that. First of all is that if just individuals make changes, that's great, and that can have a great impact, but the amount of carbon emissions that come from industry won't be affected, or greenhouse gas emissions from the industrial sector, from companies, from all these big for-profit organizations won't be touched by the individual changes we make at home so much. The other thing is that for individuals, oftentimes our choices and what we're able to do to limit our own greenhouse gas emissions is limited by what's available to us, by what our power grid looks like, by what the products on the shelves look like, what's available to us, and what sort of changes we're able to make, and focusing on policy to shift what's available to us by providing access to sustainable infrastructure and access to renewable energy allows individuals to make more of a change on their lives and their impact as well.
Thank you. Nelia, do you want to comment on that or further explore?
To add in support your message, I absolutely agree. And I think that the decisions that we make should be connected, but also collective. And of course, us as individuals have to step up and do something about it. But we should think about what companies are doing. For instance, if we think about small companies, of course, a priority might not be the environmental and sustainability plans. But we should try to make these plans a priority in the pipeline of companies in order to assure that we actually improve in this. And for instance, if we think about the context of solar panels, should we, it's been discussed recently, should we put up these solar panels in our households as individuals? Should we do this to supply energy for an entire city? What should we do? I think if we should do this at a city level, because if we did it on individuals' household, the problem would be who would have access to these solar panels. Perhaps would we cause some segregation in cities. Some people with better economic background would have access to solar panels and some others would. I think we need to think about this too. And also think that decision-making of individuals would also have a role in this issue. So perhaps if we look at the more efficient solution here, we should look at an entire city instead of individuals, and in this case also policymakers.
Thank you. Hassan?
Yeah, I would just like to add really, engaging conversation from Ishan, the point he presented, which goes on about talking about what the options we have, on the shelves or the energy mix we are provided. Like, we don't really have a choice as individuals on these bigger, larger scheme of things. And the statistic you mentioned, which is, there was a drop in 60% of the mobility of traffic, but then the carbon emissions just dropped by 8%. So we need to take a step back and look at what are the largest emitters. It is the cement and the steel industry, which constitutes of our construction. And the second one is the agriculture. So, these two are our biggest, carbon emitters. And we have to kind of step back and try to focus more on these industries, other than, the focus usually being on energy mixes, but not on the construction industry. So we need to kind of look into that as well.
Thank you. Bertram.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you. I absolutely echo what everyone said here, but I don't necessarily believe we have a climate crisis. And that is not because I don't think it's a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. It's because I think the root cause here is not climate. It's a problem with how we handle democracy. Of course, we have to tackle climate change, but what we're really seeing here is that we as a people are unable to convert our personal opinions about climate change, because it is a pressing issue and it is an issue that should be solved yesterday. We're unable to convert that into action in the societies that we live in, because democracy is, I don't like to call it flawed because we don't have anything better, but it is a weak system, and we have to improve at being a democratic country if we want to tackle pressing issues like climate change. I think that should be the main focus, educating people on how they can make a difference in climate change by being passionate about the policymakers who are in charge, because I think that is where the burden of solving climate change should be put.
It's interesting how education always comes in all topics, how important that is for policymakers and also for citizens to be educated, to make educated choices. Rebecca?
Yes, and in addition to this, these educated choices, there's also the point of accessibility that came up a lot of times already in this discussion, which I would just like to highlight, because at least where I come from in Switzerland, oftentimes sustainable products are a luxury good. So as a student, I will not be able to, do a lot of sustainable shopping or go to unpackaged stores or anything. So although I certainly agree with Bertram on the point of that, it's important that we know what is at risk, that we know how we can maybe push politicians into a direction of making very unsustainable companies more accountable for their actions, or have funds supporting a more sustainable way of having agriculture, and even all this factories that produce goods that we need to build, houses or something. It's just really important too that the accessibility and is just always kept in sight, so that it's not a luxury good, because it certainly shouldn't be just for the ones who can spend the money on it. It should be accessible for everybody.
That's a very important point, also accessibility of sustainable solutions. So Benjamin?
Yeah, I'd like to add to the accessibility and accountability point that was made there. So we have recently seen the increase in accountability from these companies, or the illusion of it, with kind of the greenwashing effect that we see, where we have these companies advertising, their sustainability and how they're managing their quotas and everything. And we do, as a society, need to be careful of this. These luxury goods that we are buying, they are said that they are sustainable, they're said they're from green sources, but are they actually? We need a transparency of these companies and how these policies are being met and how the quotas are being met. And as we rather than on an individual level focus on what we should do, we should gather together and put more pressure on the policymakers, that when these policies do change, that we have a transparent view on how they are done.
Yeah, and going off of what you were just saying about companies putting forth these things about what they're doing on the inside, I also feel like they make really lofty goals. Things like, we're going to be carbon neutral by X, or I've seen companies that were saying, oh, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2020 or 2030, and that's most definitely not going to be the case. And setting boundaries and getting smaller steps will help those things to be more actionable, and will pull more of the focus onto them, and instead of pushing it onto all the citizens.
Thank you, Vision.
I just wanted to go off that point again, like you brought up greenwashing, and back to the root question of should the responsibility be on the individual or the policymakers. If we go with the strategy of pushing the responsibility to individuals, then we're actually incentivizing companies to do more greenwashing. If we're looking to do sustainable shopping, then all these companies are going to want to express how quickly they can be carbon neutral and how green their products are, when in reality there might not be systems for oversight. So I think policy is the best way we can go forward with that. And a good example of this is the Montreal Protocol, which now has been, standing for several decades. But it's one of the best examples we have of global policy making, not even just in terms of sustainability and atmospheric protection, but overall. But it's a global policy-driven effort to reduce CFCs, to prevent the destruction of the ozone layer. And its success came from policy that targets companies that produce CFCs and emit CFCs, rather than going after individual consumers or shoppers and telling them what products to buy and what not to buy. So I think we should emulate that with our push towards climate sustainability.
So clearly a complex question, and that's, we realize because policymakers are not really solving it rapidly. So the U report, again, this report where youth voices are collected, states that 47% of young people cite a lack of capital and resources for environmental friendly ideas as the biggest challenge to supporting the transition to a green economy. What do you say about that, Nelia?
I think that funding is definitely behind this, and it plays a key role in how we make efforts towards having more sustainable products and how we push towards having more ideas materializing that can achieve these solutions. And also, I absolutely believe that innovation and science have to be funded. Like, all of us have carried out projects here, and all of us have had funding behind us. Otherwise, those projects wouldn't have made it. So I really want to highlight that we need funding towards innovation and science. And in the context of sustainability, there are a lot of grants that aim at funding projects that want to pursue sustainability plans. So I think we should really encourage our governments and organizations to promote these grants and to fund science.
David, your discovery actually made chemistry greener, or could potentially make it greener by using maybe less metals as catalysts. Did you experience this as a basis when you applied for funding, or was it something that you saw that now is opening a new window where you can get funding into more green research, sort of?
I'd say that when we first started to do it, it was purely from the point of view that we felt that it could have an impact on humans. And we saw about it would have an impact in a lot of different aspects. Sustainability, to be honest, came as later, that we started to realize it had a range of advantages, but it was also sustainable. It was part of the carbon life cycle. And all of that was important. One thing I just wanted to add, and I love this conversation actually, and really around the idea of that we have to sort of push towards larger organizations and also policy as well. But if you actually look at the climate issue, and well, climate science is not my world. I have to go to a lot of climate discussions because of my situation at the present time. And talking to a lot of great climate scientists, one of the things which is really, I find fascinating, is the idea that obviously we have renewable energy, and we need to have more renewable energy, but we also have to get carbon out of the atmosphere. And if we don't do that with a certain rate or within a certain time frame, there's really reasonable chance we're hitting a tipping point where we will, even if we become renewable, it won't necessarily help us. So getting carbon out of the atmosphere is extraordinarily important. One of the parts that came up, which I think is such a great part of this, is companies talking about being carbon neutral. There has to be, whether we like it or not, in its reality, there has to be financial drivers that will drive climate science forward. If we don't have financial drivers, will be morally correct, but it won't actually necessarily happen in the time frame that we want it is. The carbon neutral part, though, in trying to get carbon out of the atmosphere, one of the things which I think will come back to policy is enforcement of the carbon neutral component for companies. And I'll give you an example. There is a movement now towards trying to get CO2 out of the atmosphere via mineralization. That in and of itself does not sound like you could necessarily make money. No company could necessarily make money from it. However, if governments and policymakers enforce the companies to be carbon neutral and they can pay for that as an offsetting carbon, almost basically as a carbon tax, that in and of itself will provide financial drivers to allow us to start to scrub carbon out of the atmosphere. But we have to put a lot more focus, a lot more energy, a lot more resources into it. And I'll say really quickly, it's funny, you can sort of talk about health and whether we have good healthcare or not good healthcare, but governments do fund health research around the world because it's an idea that's not so abstract. We all have parents, we all have sisters and brothers, we have children, and we care about their health. So we drive forward to care about their health. Because climate change at times can sound like an abstract concept, especially to, I would say, older people who did not grow up with it. We have to keep pushing the fact that this is not an abstract concept. This is something that's real and it's happening now. And we have to get behind it the same way for policymakers and for resources for funding to go towards it in the same way that we've done about health in the past.
So then we have again the question on how to achieve this and how to move forward, and also to put pressure on these funding incentives to push for more green and sustainable research in different areas actually. So is there someone who wants to add a final word also to our viewers? What do you think would be an important thing for youth today to think about when thinking about maybe choosing a career way forward or something that you could do on your own? Hector, do you want to add something?
Sure. Entering into this conversation, we were talking about individuals versus companies, industries, and I think we can approach this with a multifaceted approach, right? I mean, we're not only talking about individual actions as in, oh, what are you using on a daily basis, your sustainable shopping, or industries as in a manufacture, production, etc. Moving back to this greenwashing, right, to how companies and brands essentially promise that they're going to go carbon neutral or etc. I mean, what happens is that the gain they obtain by announcing these promises is much bigger than the downfall they have from not complying with these promises, right? I mean, if we look at it in an objective basis, but we the people have the power to raise that second bar, right? I mean, to make this entire matter much more important and urgent problem, right? I mean, we as a society have the potential to make them accountable, right? I mean, we can use our voice, we can use our democracy to essentially pressure them into realizing that this is the will of the people, right? I mean, that we as a collective need, and we need to strive for a community that's green, right? No more fake promises, no more greenwashing, but actually doing some washing of this planet Earth.
Yeah, good point. Anyone want a final word in this, or your? Yes.
So, of course, the topic of our discussion focuses around science, and I think science innovation around sustainability is going to be a really important driving factor to enable a sustainable future for the planet. For anyone at home watching as well, this is not just something that you have to be involved in science with to make a difference. Like, we're talking about this multifaceted approach to solving the climate crisis. We'll also need policymakers and business people who are able to adapt to new sustainable markets, to open up businesses that focus on those as well, and journalists and protesters and a whole world outside of science that has to collaborate to enable a sustainable future. So I think that's really important as well, and I'm hoping that this conversation can help inspire people outside of science as well as within.
Thank you. So this question and this topic complex, but we need actually everyone to step up, both individuals, companies, policymakers, journalists, teachers, scientists, all of us actually. So thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts and contributions and making a better and brighter future also through science, but also all of us actually. And to our viewers, you can continue this conversation on how to make our future more sustainable and brighter by downloading our free of use appendix on the website to bring to your classroom, science club, or family and friends dinner. Thank you so much.